everyone and welcome back. Welcome to my this T3 stack series, and in this video we are already covering 3-4 videos, and in this video we are going to talk about tRPC server. So let's say if I ask you to build a simple tRPC server, right, which contains tRPC router and it exposes some interface like tRPC interface, then how we can proceed further, like how to get started building an independent tRPC app without just using Next.js and all these integrations that we will plug in. We will plug in this tRPC routes with the Next.js application. First, let's try to understand how tRPC works. So tRPC, for the tRPC implementation, you can just use this tRPC server and tRPC client. tRPC server is to create the tRPC server like Express, right? Express is Node.js framework that is used to create APIs. Similarly, we can just use tRPC server, and then first we need to create a router instance. This is like, you can say, our main file, tRPC file, that will expose the tRPC router. This is the router, t.router, and how you initialize the tRPC backend, init tRPC.create. Okay, that is coming from tRPC server, and from this t instance you will get a router and the procedure, and you are going to define the queries on top of this procedure, public procedure. So we got the router instance. Now on top of this router instance we will just import the router, and in this router we are going to define our procedures. Okay, because we are getting routers and public procedure from the tRPC file. Now how we will be adding these query and the mutation using public procedure. So let's say user list. So user list I'm adding inside a router, and this is a public procedure dot query. So this particular API is exposing user list method, tRPC method, and this is all about query. It's like retrieving data from the data source. Query is always about fetching the data. Mutation is always about changing the state. Okay, public procedure dot query we are adding. Similarly, let's say if you are taking the request parameters from the request body, right? Let's say I'm building a method which takes a payload which is about create user. So you will be taking some input also from the user. So user by ID, you are taking a ID from the user. So here we can use Jod. Yup. So these are just a different libraries to just validate Jod and Yup. And here we are doing the same. We are just doing it can be a Prisma, it can be typo, RM, any library to find operation, to run the find operations. And we can add a mutation. Mutation means you are actually creating the resource in the database, right? So here we are just adding another public procedure dot mutation input. These are the input arguments, and dot mutation. Here you are actually adding something in the database. And then finally, how to serve your interface through the HTTP interface, right? Create a HTTP server. Now this thing can be done through the Express also. You just need to use Express middleware, and then you can just use this. Instead of create HTTP server, you can just plug tRPC with the Express app also. If you look at all these places together, right, this is my database. It's just simply doing there are some users. I'm just doing a find many, find by ID, and create operations. A simple mock implementations using array. It's like in memory database. We have created a simple array, and we are doing dot push, dot find, and returning the users. This is our database interface, and then this is the tRPC which is returning the router and the public procedure. And that then comes our main file where we are actually defining all the query and the mutation. So we are getting the public procedure and router, and inside this router we are defining all the public procedures. Okay, user list, user by ID, user create, and depends on if it is taking input, then we are doing dot input dot query, dot input dot mutation, dot input, or if there is no input, then it's just a dot query. So syntax wise, I think tRPC implementation is easy. Initially it looks complex, but you just got the public procedure and the router, and it's all about creating this router instance, creating the app router, and then pass this app router to the create HTTP server. That's it. And then server.listen. So let's say I can say that we have built an Express app. We can build Express app in like 100 seconds. Similarly, the tRPC server can also be built in the same amount of time, and learning curve is also kind of similar. Now here you can keep adding the routers. I have a user router, account router, profile router, course router. All these different routers can have their own queries and mutation, different methods. This is how we are validating and then doing a mutation, which is updating, fetching the data from the database. Okay. Once you have this tRPC server running, what is the next step? Who is going to consume it? So it's not like simple you can just do Axios or fetch to this HTTP interface. You need to use this tRPC client library at your client side. So there is a tRPC React, I think, for integration with the React, where you have to create a providers. A simple tRPC client is like this. So here you are creating a proxy and the batch link and creating a tRPC. This is kind of similar to how we create a GraphQL client. So you got the tRPC and then you can do the query. How? Await tRPC dot the method and the query. So some methods are doing query, some methods are doing mutation. So simply once you got the tRPC instance from here, you can do tRPC.query.method name or tRPC.mutation.method name. Simplified implementation, I will say, this is how it really works. You can just create a client and then you can just do create user and you just do await. That will give you the response object. Okay, so all these things we are going to play with. So let's say this is like a simple server, right? Okay, first I will talk about simple server. Okay, it won't allow me. Okay, here I'm creating a router. If you see, I have three methods in this router, and the public processor I got from the tRPC. And inside this router I have a user list, user by ID, and a user create. These are public processor.query or public processor.mutation with the input validations and everything. And then we are creating the HTTP server, passing this router and listening to the port. Simple, like 10 to 20 lines of code. We have the server ready. Now client is simple. Here what we are doing simply is creating the tRPC client, and then inside this, like, okay, I wanted to really execute it, I can just do a simple async function and do await tRPC.userList.query, tRPC.userCreate.mutation, tRPC.user by ID.query. So I will say this is like a simplified implementation which you might not have not seen with any other interface. So it's like a very simplified interface of creating a simple server and the client. And I don't see any complexity with the code. Also, code is like straightforward. This is how we are creating a router, and then with the help of router we are creating a HTTP server and then doing dot listen, right? So simply this is creating our tRPC server. Okay, now this is like, okay, hello world application, right? Now let's do it really. Let's pen down and let's write some code. We are going to just talk about all the dependencies we need and then create a simple tRPC server first. Okay, so in this code, we already have one sample, and this is the tRPC server. Here we are going to create our simple tRPC server. So I will just do pnpm init. This will give me a simple package, and then I will start installing all the required modules. So what all I need? Npm add. As we discussed, we need a tRPC server. We need express. So there are two things. Either you can use HTTP server provided by tRPC adapter, or you can use express. So let's use express here. Express, and we can use nodemon to restart the application, jod for the validation, and cross origin resource sharing, and types express that we can add in the dev dependencies. So let's get all these modules installed. Then we will add more dependencies, some dev dependencies, that is all about typings. So I mean types node, types Let me just see. If I do it like this, then I can add types. So inside types we can add express, types node. I think types node is we don't need types, and that's it. So it will get added as a dev dependencies in this. So here you can see tRPC server we are using 10.26, that is good. And here let's say we are going to use app.ts as a main file. Okay, now what we are going to do inside this, we have simple node mon app.ts, and here we'll start creating our folders. Let's say I will create a router. Inside router I can define my routes, and rest all the files like api.ts, that will be my main file, and trpc.ts. Okay, API packages.json tRPC, and inside the routers we will create a simple routers. So here I will just create a index.ts and users.ts. Okay, so what we are going to do is we have package.json. Here we will add the TypeScript and tsconfig. So we need ts node because we are writing and I will also add a TypeScript there. Ts node and TypeScript with these two packages, and these will be added as a dev dependency. And what we need a node mon, because node mon is running our server. So I will create a node mon.json. So create a new file, node mon.json. That will help us to run this server automatically when you change the application. And we also need a tsconfig.json. I will create this in the root, config.json, and this is my simple tsconfig. Okay, and what I'm going to do, these files are scattered here and there. I can create a source folder. And first of all, there are two implementation. Either we can use express or we just use http server, right? So first I'm going to do the implementation with the http server. So I will just copy all these files to the source folder. Okay, and now we are not going to write the code for the first implementation because we have already seen how it works through the documentation, and we are just going to go through that. Okay, so if you look into the tRPC, what it is giving us this router and the public processor. Okay, and then you can use these router and public processor in your index.ts. So everything is inside here. We are importing public processor and router and creating app router, which we are passing to the create HTTP server, which is coming from tRPC server. So there are two ways. Either we can use express or we can just use this create HTTP server, HTTP server.listen, a simple implementation. So we are just using only these three files here. So in the next example, I will be using express only for that. So here just three files of code, and we can just run this. We have a tsconfig, we have source file. So I will go to the package.json, and here it's src index.ts. That is our main file right now. Okay, and inside that, what do we have? So we have just two commands. We can just do a watch. So it will use the tsc, or just a simple build. This is a build, and then start node mon. So it will look for node mon.json. Okay, so I can just do npm run start. So it will be using this node mon.json file, and it will try to start my application, right? Or you can just do simply npm run build, that is going to use this TypeScript compiler tsc, that is going to create a build that will be looking at the tsconfig. Okay, base URL is source, and create a dist output directory. Okay, it is creating this. Now this is just like a simple implementation which we have already seen in the example. Create a tRPC router and public procedure, use that public procedure and define the different methods, and here we are using mock database which has these simple methods. We won't be able to test it until unless we don't have a client, so it's just a simple server implementation. We need to have a client to test this implementation. Okay, this really works. It's not like, okay, you build a REST API through the Express and then start hitting the Axios fetch or using the Postman and all. I try to find any client side tool like Postman to test a tRPC, but that's not there right yet. You can use client dev tools on the Chrome, but for that you need to write a tRPC client side application. It's like a dev tool, same as the Redux dev tool and all. Similarly, there is a tRPC dev tool, but you need to have a client for it. So now next thing we are going to do is let's use Express. So currently we are using this HTTP server. Instead of that, can we use a simple Express and do the same implementation? So to do things with Express, I created this Express folder and I'm going to put stuff inside this. So router and API.ts. So this is the Express version of same implementation. So I will start writing things inside our API.ts. So inside API.ts, what we need is first we need to import Express from Express. Okay, because we are going to use this, and then okay, that middleware we will use it later. First of all, like const app equal to Express, we got the instance of it, and then app.use, here we are going to register a middleware. So whenever there is a request coming at for the tRPC, here we are going to use create Express. So there is a middleware. Okay, we need to import this, then only we'll get it. This is coming from Express tRPC adapter. Create Express middleware. Okay, and what all argument you need to pass? The router. So you need to create a router. Let's say we have our app router, and the context we will create. Like if you want to override the context, then we can do it something like this, and then we can just do this is the Express app.listen. So listen comes with the callback, right? We can just simply say, okay, app.listen on 3000, or we might be getting code from here, and then just a simple callback. Okay, server started on, oh, I'm sorry, here we will just add console.log app server started on port, and we'll define the port here. So this is our port value. So we are just starting a simple Express application, and then we can also export the type from here. Export type app router equal to type of, what is the router? App router. Okay, so we need to create app router. So app routers we need to create inside the router. Okay, let's we'll export these types once we import this app router here. So this is just like a root file. Now what we need to create, we need to define the router and the context. So for router we are going inside the index.ts, and first router is very simple router. What we are going to do is first we will import processor and instance, so that we are going to get from tRPC. So inside tRPC we can get two things. Okay, there is a public procedure, and I can copy things from here. Okay, I can copy the tRPC file because we are going to use the same tRPC implementation. So here what I need to do is inside router index.ts we will be importing two things. public procedure and what all it is exporting, router and public procedure. Router and public procedure from, that is coming from tRPC, and all the other things will be added on top of this public procedure, right? So this is how we are creating our app. So here I will just create export const router equal to t. Also we need to import instance of t, and how we do it, t dot router. What happens, is it not exporting that? Export const t, we can just use public procedure. Okay, it's not being exported from tRPC. We can export t also from that, export const t. Okay, and t dot router, we already have router, so why should I use that? So here I can just use router, and on top of router we can define all the methods. So inside the router, this contains all the methods, like let's say hello, right? Say hello will be, and we also have this public procedure dot. So here you can do define two things, input. I will try to explain. First is input. Okay, you will put something. Then output, you can also define the schema of the output, how the output should look like, and then you can do query or you can do mutation. There are two things you can run on top of that, query and dot mutation. So we are just going to run a simple query on that because I don't have any input for this, and this is my callback. And inside this I will just discuss, like, okay, what should I return, and I will just return hello tRPC. That's it. So this is my first method. Then there is another method which is public procedure dot input. Okay, here I can just define if there is input criteria. You can use jod and all these libraries. Here I will get the input type. I mean, currently we are just checking a particular type, so this is the input property you are getting. And what we will do is, if type of input equal to string, then we are good. Return input, otherwise throw new error, invalid input, right? And then we will do either query and mutation. I'm doing a mutation here, and how the mutation works, this is also a callback. That mutation you will access the request object. First of all, we can just log the, I can log the input, like what I'm getting in the request.input. So this is how you will access the input parameter. Then return, we can define, okay, what you want to return. So I can just say, return the same thing, tRPC hello with this input value, request.input, because that is a string. So this is how we have defined two public procedures, right? And we just import these public procedures at the root file in the api.ts. This is the app router, so we just import this app router from there. And then if you want to override the context, then you can just create the context. And let's rename this to index.ts, src express index.ts, and let's change this src express index.ts. Okay, and then I can just do the same thing, npm run build, and then npm run start. Okay, there is some error. And after express.d.ts, there is some typing errors. Has no default export. Everything as express. Will this work? Express is not callable. Okay, this happens when you have has no call signature. How do I import? I mean, this should work. Express, and I will check. Do I have the type? Types express is there. There is no default export. Okay, let me fix this. We can fix this by multiple ways, either by extending the ts config file. Okay, so I did small change here. We don't need context. You are just passing the router, create express middleware, and we are starting the application. This is our simple interface. Okay, say hello and the log method, and it is taking this input. We are not using jod, but you can use jod to validate this input string. And this is where we are just returning the router and the public processor, and this is where we are using the express, this middleware, and we are just starting the application not by using HTTP server, by express instance app. I mean, we were facing the issue with the express, so for now I'm just using ES5 way of import. A const express equal to require express. This VS Code TypeScript is not able to identify if I'm trying to import express something like this. Import express equal to import express from express. I mean, ideally it should have taken it like this, but then this, I need to fix this, has no default export. Or the another way of doing it is import express as express from express, but then it is becoming not callable syntax. So what is the safest way of doing it right now? Just require it like this, ES5 way of importing the express, and our server will be started. And we are using this tRPC endpoint, and this tRPC / tRPC will expose this router interface that has two methods, say hello and the log. Okay, so it is just a super server side implementation we have done. Now let's say if we create a client and try to access these methods, because we cannot test it through the Postman or some any other REST API testing tool, we need to create a simple client, and we will just use a tRPC client, and we will try to invoke these methods. So for client, we can just simply create another folder here, client, because here I'm not going to write a React client or Angular client, simple client, just to play around with this example. So inside a client, I will have index.ts. There we are just going to use this particular import. So here we are going to use tRPC client. Do we have already this tRPC client? I think we don't have. So first of all, we will add it. So pnpm add the tRPC client, and from the client we are going to import HTTP. Okay, let's get this added. Then we should be able to import things from here. It's always a little slow. So here I'm just doing tRPC client, and then we can add a couple of things, HTTP batch option, HTTP batch link, that will help us to create the client and create HTTP proxy client. These two things we need. Find module, I already added. That's the problem with this. So we have package JSON. I can see tRPC client is there. Okay, this soon will be resolved. Okay, and how we are going to create? So we also need to import the type. So because this is the tRPC is nothing but a type safe API implementation. So we need to get the type of our router. So we already have this router on our src index.ts, and we are writing all the code together. So I'm going to use in this index.ts import type app router. This will give us okay what all different types you have, and then we have const tRPC equal to create tRPC proxy client, and that is going to create a client for this router, app router. So we will understand okay what all methods are there, and here we need to pass links. Okay, links, and then inside this we can specify http batch links, and here is our port 3000. There we have this tRPC server running, and then we can just define a simple method async function main, and here we can call all these methods, and we will just call this main dot catch if there is any error coming. So we will just try to log console dot error. Okay, now inside this main, because this is where we are going to get the data by calling this tRPC method, so we got the tRPC dot, so it should give me the types dot. Okay, await tRPC. Why it is not able to identify? So this is the tRPC is created of type app router, create proxy client, create tRPC proxy client of this app router. So in that case, the type for this tRPC, it should be able to export all the type definitions for us. So let's see what is wrong here. This is the app router. This app router contains this is our app router, which contains all these types: user list, user by id, user create, all the different methods which has been added here, right? And this is the type which we are exporting, app router. This app router type we are using here. Either this TypeScript implementation is little slow, tRPC unknown word. Okay, because this create proxy client should return me that, okay, maybe because this is not able to identify. This is the problem with this sometimes VS Code, it is not able to load the types, and obviously we will not be able to autocomplete it. So let's see, let me fix this types error. So I just restarted my VS Code, and it is able to identify these types. That is totally strange sometimes. Okay, because I can see in the node modules tRPC client and server both are there. Okay, so then it was complaining about this transformer. I know how to, what is the transformer which we use to transform the payload at the client and server side. I put undefined for now, and then here I can define all the methods which we have in our interface. So here we can just put all our methods tRPC dot. Here we'll get user list dot query. Okay, and then I can just do console.log data, or maybe user data, and then similarly we'll just try to do console.log for other properties. So there are multiple methods on this tRPC server, we can call them one by one. So here we can just tRPC dot user create, right? This is the mutation, and here you need to pass some properties. So here you can do mutate, and here you need to pass the name property. Right, and this is user create data. And the next thing is we can just do the build. We just build this application and then node and then this particular file. So now let's try to run this. What I can do is simply I can just do a simple build. Build will give me this file npm run build. Okay, because I just wanted to run the JS file, and here we are not using browser. So, and we are just creating this client. So you need to have a fetch object in the, if we are using browser or using the React app, then we already have a fetch. So if I try to run it like this, so npm run build, And then I will just do, this just a warning. And then here I can see no fetch implementation found. So what happens is we are not using Node 18 version. In the 18 version, fetch API is already the part of the Node.js. But for that, if it is not there, we need to add a polyfill for that. So what I did here is I created a simple polyfill file global.fetch, and I'm just adding the fetch, feeding the fetch, passing the fetch in the global object, Node.js global object. This is like simply you can add a polyfill to have a backward compatibility. That fetch is available in the Node 16. Currently my version is I think lower than that. If I just try to check what is my current version, it's 16.18, not 18.x. So we don't have fetch APIs. So what I will do is I will try to import polyfill here, and then I will just do the build. So it is doing the build again, and then I need to first start my tRPC server. It is running. Then what we can do is simply go to my another terminal, and already built. So I'm just running the JS file, and you can see here, this is important part. This is how we are connecting to the tRPC server and getting the response back. So first data user list.query, that is empty. And then here we are just creating the user. So this is a user created response. So let's say if I try to create a user multiple times. So for that, I just need to build it again. And then I can simply do this. And you can see the ID 4 because I'm just trying to print only the fourth ID, fourth user created. And if I just try to fetch the list now, okay, give me the okay, let's say there are 5 users, and now after that I'm just trying to create a list, fetch the list now, and here I will do console.log because this is in-memory database, so it will be lost once you start the application. npm run build, we are creating 4 users, and then here you can see the output. So all these things are coming from the tRPC server, and this is how we have created a minimal client implementation. How we are doing it? We are just creating a tRPC instance, tRPC client object, and then doing a tRPC dot. This is the RPC method name, user list.query, user create.mutation. So there are the input also, we are passing it like this. So this is a simple tRPC implementation. We just have to add a polyfill because because what we are doing, we are trying to simulate the client behavior through the Node.js. Obviously there is no window object, no browser, no fetch APIs. So we are injecting through the polyfill. What we can do is now we will do a simple example with the React app, like simple to do. There we can just see the whole end-to-end demo where we have a to-dos APIs from the tRPC server, and the React will have this tRPC client and will be doing a query and mutation to the server.